Hi, I'm Mitch Gallagher from Sweetwater, and I am joined by a very special guest today. This is Doug Fearn, the DW Fearn.
Great to be here, Mitch.
Great to see you as well. We've been seeing each other at trade shows and things going back more than 20 years, I think, at this point.
I'm sure,
yeah, it's been a while, but all those years you're still making, you are making fantastic gear. I mean, just so excited to have you here and to have some of this beautiful gear to show people.
Yeah, and I'm really excited to have this on Sweetwater now, because that's just a wonderful opportunity for us.
Yeah, absolutely. You were saying that you're a customer.
I am a customer.
Yeah. So you're. I mean, that is one of the things that to me has always set the DW Fearn gear apart. Is that you're coming from a music background, from a music list, all the way back to when you were young and your dad was playing French horn with the symphony and things. Talk a little bit about that. How did you get into this amazing gear?
Yeah, it's an interesting journey because my father played in the Philadelphia Orchestra, played French horn. And for some reason, he would take me occasionally to rehearsals, even when I was 5, 6 years old. And I was just fascinated by not only the music, but just wandering around the Academy of Music in Philadelphia, which is a wonderful concert hall, and listening to how things sounded. And of course, I knew so many of the orchestra members, so I was sort of accepted as somebody that was allowed to walk around.
Yeah, you could get behind the scenes.
Yeah. So that was a big influence on me, although I didn't particularly appreciate that at the time. So many things in our lives, you know, in retrospect, we understand how important they were.
If only you'd known when you were 5.
Right. Yeah, right. I wouldn't have had a concept of what I was going to be doing. But I was also interested in technology and science. So I started building electronic stuff, you know, when I was 6 or 7 years old.
Wow.
And by the time I was 9 or 10, I was building vacuum tube amplifiers of different types, you know, for my own use. So, I mean, what else could I do? You know, it was like the perfect combination of the musical sensitivity plus my technological background.
So were you entirely self-taught with the electronics? Or did you later study that or get into it more? Or has it always been just self-taught?
I'm just better off learning things on my own. You know, so that worked really well for me. And it really made me actually get my career started much earlier because I was starting to do professional recording, you know, when I was 16, 17 years old. By having those few extra years, you know, I go back a long way into the 60s.
That is, again, part of what really, to me, differentiates this gear is that it's kind of the inventor story or whatever. You were building something because you weren't able to find exactly what you wanted to produce the quality that you wanted.
Well, that's right. And my first studio, it was all scrounged together. I mean, it took every penny I had to buy an Ampex 4-track, half-inch machine, you know, and a few good mics. And for preamps, I used all these old, various manufacturers, but a lot of them were RCA, mic preamps that nobody wanted. And so I used those, and that was my studio. And I couldn't wait to get rid of that and get a real solid-state console, you know, which I eventually did. But the sound of those preamps never really left my mind. You know, I never was really happy with the sounds I was getting. And you know, I don't know why it took me so long. I guess it was just too busy running a studio. That one day I just said, I'm going to see if I can build something to duplicate, you know, those old designs that I loved the sound of so much. I said, and so I studied what they did, and I said, wow, I know how I can do this better. You know, they really cut a corner here. I won't do that. And in every step of the way, I said, I'm not making any compromises. You know, the price is going to fall where it has to. I'm not building to a price. And, you know, I had no idea whether there would be any market for this or not. But, you know, it's amazing. 30 years later.
30 years, it's your 30th anniversary this year of the
It is the
Fearn
30th
company.
anniversary.
1993.
Yeah.
So were you still doing, when you launched the company officially, we'll say in 93, did you still have the studio? It was veritable
recording, Philadelphia,
Did you still have that studio at that time, or had you gone completely into this?
There was a transition period there where I was doing location recording. It was mostly classical and choral and some jazz kind of things. You know, I got to the point where the studio environment was really getting oppressive to me. And I needed a break from that. And this was a great diversion from that. And it gave me these tools. And I've sort of come full circle because now most of my time is spent recording again.
Oh, that's great.
But only with people I want to work with.
Right.
It's not a commercial studio.
Mm-hmm. And are you still doing mainly acoustic music, or are you working in other genres as well?
We just did a punk project a couple months ago. Which was fun. But yeah, that's my orientation is acoustic music. So that's what I gravitate towards.
So when you think of the DW Fearn Gear and the VT1 preamp, the VT2 preamp in particular, do you see them as this is like the ultimate transparent tube kind of thing, or is there a signature to Fearn Gear?
Well, yeah, I want it to be transparent, but I also want that characteristic that you get with tubes that you just can't get any other way.
Right.
You know, there's just something about the way a vacuum tube handles audio. You know it. It's, everybody knows it if they've heard it. It's just something magical that happens. So that's what I do. But I also want all the products to have that sort of family sound so that, you know, they all have that same sort of characteristic. And one of the key things is I want to make it so you can't make it sound bad.
Right.
You know, no matter what you do with the controls, it's never going to sound bad. May not be what you want, but, you know, it won't sound bad. And so a lot of times the controls are sort of limited in their range so that I know, you know, all these years of working in a studio, I know what their challenges are. Yeah. You know, so I design it and to meet that and also to make it easy. Because when you're in a session, you don't have time to fiddle around with stuff that's, you know, that takes a lot of time to dial in what you want. Right. So I try to make it so that it's easy to get the sound you want real quickly.
One of the things I noticed recently is we're going to get a little bit more into the gear, but you updated some of the pieces of gear just a couple of years ago. And one of the really cool things that I noticed was you've built in attenuation into the VT preamp so that you can now use that on your mix bus or when you're mastering to get some of that tube richness and dynamics in there.
Well, I mean, that has an interesting history because I had a customer early on who put the mic preamp on the mix bus. And I said, you know, you really shouldn't do that. It's like levels, impedance, everything's really wrong for doing that. And I said, let me build you a little pad box to make it right so that you can put it on a line level mix bus. And we sold a lot of those individual boxes. But at one point we just said, why don't we just incorporate it into the circuit design? Because it was easy enough to do.
Right.
So now we have line level input.
Yeah. So that extends the versatility to the mix stage as well as the mastering stage,
right.
if you want to.
And I've had a lot of people tell me that they had, especially if they're trying to restore some old recording that wasn't done very well, that this was like the magic thing for them to, you know, bring it back to life.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk a little bit about some of the individual pieces here. The sort of progenitor of the whole thing would be the VT1, the tube preamp, which we have a VT2 here, the two-channel version. Tell us about that, how you developed that preamp and who it's for. What is that aimed at?
Well, you know, I designed it for myself. I mean, everything's designed for myself. It all was designed to fill a need that I had. And if people like that, great. And they do. So that's worked out well. Yeah, right. But it was for me, you know, the way I heard things and what I wanted the box to do. And the VT1 design, you know, I spent better part of 2 years on that, trying to figure it out, you know, and just listening to it a lot, using it a lot, and hearing, I like this, I don't like that. And anybody that knows me knows that one of my highest compliments when I hear a piece of gear is to say, nothing bothers me. You know, and that's sort of the story of my life is eliminating irritants. You know, and that's applied to the audio as well. So I don't want it to offend my ears ever anyway. And the VT1 did reasonably well. I mean, it was hard. This is pre-internet, you know, it was hard I sent out mailings, you know, and people were buying them in pairs, of course. So the VT2 was an easy follow-on product. And then Equalizer was, another thing that I wanted for myself. I wanted a compressor for myself. So those two things came about in, I guess, 2000 and 2005.
Mm-hmm.
And then in 2017, one of my assemblers who had worked for me for many, many years, Joff Hazelrig, and I had talked to him off and on, and my other assemblers as well. I said, I'm getting to the point where I don't want to be doing all this day-to-day stuff. I had other people who did all the assembly, but I did all the final testing. I put all the things in the boxes to ship out and all that. And I said, would you be interested? And he and his brother George just jumped on it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's been a great thing because it's freed me up from all that. I can devote my time to developing new products and doing recording, which
Mm-hmm.
is, which I love to do, which is also a great aspect of how I design stuff.
Right.
I got to use it to make sure it is what I want.
Right.
So now they handle all that. So that's been terrific for me.
Right. And
I couldn't ask for a better team to have taken over.
They're certainly friends of ours here at Sweetwater, the Hazelrig Industries, and the brothers. Of course, they have their own line that you were involved in as well. It's sort of wouldn't say a spin-off, but sort of a development from this, and now they're working actively with the Fearn Gear as well.
Right. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So, I designed those things for them. I mean, they did all the packaging and all that, so they deserve a huge amount of credit.
Yeah.
But everything that they put out on the Hazelrig Industries brand has been based on my designs.
Yeah. And like you, they are music-centric and audio-centric. They're both great players.
Yeah.
And, studio musicians and recording engineers and everything.
Mm-hmm.
So the three of you working together, that's just a fantastic aspect of the results and the quality of the gear under both the brands.
Yeah, it's true. And they're such superb musicians. When I have sessions when I need them, I wouldn't use anybody else.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
So I have to ask you, and we were actually commenting about this before the cameras were rolling, the look of the gear is very distinctive and the color schemes and things. Is there a story there?
There is a story. When I built the early prototypes, they were just raw aluminum, because it's just a stock panel. Mm-hmm. I decided that I needed to make a prototype that I could give to people to listen to, and I figured I got to make it look a little dressier than this.
Right.
So I was going to paint that myself, and I went to a hardware store, and I'm looking at all these cans of spray paint. And I sort of had in mind a color, sort of a blue-gray color, and I had this can of blue-gray spray paint in my hand. And then off the corner of my eye, there's this burgundy red color. And I said, nobody does equipment with that kind of color. I can't do that. I said, but this is just a prototype. Maybe I'll just do that. So I put that away, grabbed a can of burgundy spray paint, and did the first panel. And in the photos, the product photos, it looked fantastic. People really responded to it because at that time, there was no pro audio gear that was red. I mean, there's quite a bit now. But we were really first with that. I was delighted because it's my favorite color.
Yeah.
So why not?
Yeah, sure. Well, you always know when there's DW Fearn Gear in the rack because it shows up right away with the color and just the design with the way the knobs pop and of course the cool vintage looking VU meters and everything. It has a lot of vibe.
Well, I designed all that because I thought that who better would understand what this should look like, If it sounds great, it should look great.
Sure.
And it should be built to last, too, which is another important factor. So just the color scheme of it, we've carried through on all the products because it just works really well.
Yeah, I love it. It's fun. And, I mean, they're beefy. That front panel that's a solid chunk of metal there.
Well, that's a 1/4-inch piece of aluminum that's actually used to be milled, but our metal fabricator now does it with a laser. It's a big, heavy piece of metal.
Yeah, definitely. So it's interesting, your background listening to the symphony in your early days and recording and things through the years. It reminds me a lot of the great producer engineers I've spoken to, Bruce Swedien and a number of other people who always talk about you have to know what the sound is in the room before you can try to capture it to tape or hard drive, whatever.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about that and how that factors into the way you approach recording and how that factors into how you use the gear.
When I'm involved in a project that I'm producing, so I have control over it. I mean, obviously the artist is the key, the music is the key, But for me to facilitate the optimum capture of that, I start long before we get into the studio, just doing a demo, listening to it and figuring out, what do we do with this?
Right.
And, my philosophy has always been the music tells you what it needs, and you just have to listen to it, and then what it needs. And for me, that's sort of the whole key, it's just like, this is what the music wants.
Mm-hmm.
And then as far as the sound is concerned, I have a sound, and if I go back to recordings I made in my first studio in 1969 and listen to them, logically their recordings today are much better, but the basic sound of it is still the same. And you could say, well, I haven't made any progress in 50 years. Or on the other hand, you could say, well, that was the sound I had in my head then, and that's the same sound I go for today.
Right. Yeah, having that target and that whole philosophy of how you use the gear and create the sound that you want, it all comes through so well in all the gear that you design as well. So that's a lot of fun. I've noticed in a lot of your recordings that you rely on ribbon mics a lot,
Mm-hmm.
and higher end condensers, but a lot of ribbon mics. What is it about ribbon mics that you enjoy?
Some of the first mics I ever had were ribbon mics. I had a RCA 44 and a 77 because for a brief period of time in high school, I worked for a radio station in Philadelphia as an engineer. The station went back to 1926, and they never threw anything away. So they had a lot of really classic ribbon mics there. And I just kept saying, can I buy this from you, And finally, I ended up buying all these mics, and I just fell in love with that sound.
Yeah.
But then running a commercial studio, like in the 1970s, that ribbon sound was not in vogue at all.
Right.
And so I went the usual route with, the best condenser mics I could get and dynamics. And I think when I started doing the location recording, that's when I said, this really needs a ribbon mic.
Mm-hmm.
And so that sort of set me back on that path, mainly with the AEA series of mics. I was just so happy with that sound that at this point, I would say well over 90% of the mics I use in a session are ribbons.
Nice.
For everything.
Right. Does that factor at all into the preamp design? Was that part of it? Was that enhancing those ribbon mics?
Actually, when I designed the mic preamps, it was for condenser mics because that's what everybody used at that point.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't particularly. And, I've toyed with the idea of making a preamp that was designed specifically for ribbon mics. I have a prototype on my workbench right now that may become a product. We'll see.
Yeah.
I never know for sure. Because ribbon mics have a little bit different characteristic. They like a higher load impedance, and they need a little more gain.
Mm-hmm.
So I use the VT2 and its variants. We make a 4-channel version of it as well on my ribbon mics all the time, and I never feel a lack of gain, But I think there's circumstances where a little bit more gain would probably be beneficial.
Sure.
So probably we'll do something like that in the future.
Oh, that's exciting.
Mm-hmm.
Exciting to think about that.
Yeah.
You mentioned radio, and I know you were, this is the years we've talked a little bit, and you're an amateur radio and Morse Code guy.
Well, yeah. I got my amateur radio license when I was 12.
Mm-hmm.
And I just discovered that Morse Code to me it's music, really. It lacks many of the characteristics of music, but the concept of it is still musical.
Right.
And I could spend a lot of time talking about that, but I mean, the basic concept is that it just appealed to me.
Uh-huh.
And I have no time for that anymore. I still have equipment,
Yeah.
And one of these days I'll probably hook stuff up again and get back on the air with that, with the code. But it was influential on me for, developing that sense of rhythm and things like that are necessary in music.
Speaking of music, you're here, the Hazelwig brothers are here with you, and you guys are working in the studios here at Sweetwater on a project.
Yeah, we're doing this very interesting project in Atmos. They've been working on it for quite a while. This is the first time I've been involved in it, and I'm only peripherally involved. I'm just sitting in the back, which is fine.
Sure.
And it's really exciting to see what this new technology can do.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I've heard some of the stuff that Mike Miller did in your, I guess it's a C room, and you know, it's amazing.
Yeah, and he's here as well, working on some things as well. So I can't wait to hear what comes out of all those sessions, because it's an amazing new frontier.
Yeah.
For especially recording projects from scratch for Atmos. There aren't that many of them yet that have been specifically recorded for that format.
Yeah, it's true, and it does take a totally different technique.
Yeah.
I mean, you can take a regular recording that wasn't intended for it and make it work in Atmos, but if you start with that from the beginning, I think you're going to end up with a much better product.
Right, yeah. Well, I know they've got DW Fearn gear back there, they've got Hazel Rig gear back there, and they're making some fantastic sounding things, so I'm going to stop over and check out what's going on. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's a pretty interesting project.
Yeah. Well, Doug, it's been such a pleasure to sit down with you and to chat a little bit about the long history you have. You're an iconic figure in the pro audio world with this amazing gear that you create, and it's just been a real pleasure to chat with you.
It's been my pleasure, Mitch.
Great to see you.
Yeah, you too.
And please check out the DW Fearn equipment. I mean, it's top notch. This is top of the line tube-based gear that is going to elevate your studio immediately when you install one of these pieces. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Mitch Gallagher from Sweetwater.